When I first married David, I thought I had everything I ever wanted. He was steady, hardworking, dependable, the kind of man who would always keep a roof over my head and food on the table. In the beginning, that felt like love. His hand on mine during dinner, the way he used to text me in the middle of the day just to say he was thinking about me, the promises we whispered to each other in the quiet of our first nights together. It all seemed so certain, so uncheckable, but time has a way of dulling even the brightest of things. As the months turned into years, David's devotion shifted, not away from me deliberately, but toward the endless responsibilities of work, of money, of proving himself in a world that never stopped demanding more. I don't think he ever realized how his absence grew louder with each passing evening. I would set the table for two, then quietly put away one plate when he called to say he was working late again. I'd wait for his goodnight text, only to fall asleep with the phone dark and silent in my hand. At first, I told myself it was temporary. That's what wives do. They stay patient, they understand. But patience can wear thin when loneliness becomes the only constant companion. The more I tried to convince myself I was fine, the more I felt the hollow ache settle in my chest. That's when Mark began appearing in our lives. Mark had been David's friend long before I came into the picture. They had grown up together, shared dorm rooms in college, laughed through the reckless years of their 20s. To me, he was always just David's friend. But gradually, that title began to stretch and change. Mark would stop by for dinner. When David couldn't make it, he'd linger after dropping David off from one of their late-night outings. Sometimes, when my husband's work pulled him away for days at a time, Mark would come by to check on me, to make sure I wasn't alone too much. I should have noticed it then, the small shifts, the subtle gravity pulling me closer to him. Unlike David, Mark seemed to notice things. He remembered how I always sweetened my coffee with exactly 1 spoon of sugar and just a touch of cream. He asked about the books I stacked on the living room table, actually listening when I explained what I liked about each one. He laughed at my dry jokes, not politely, but with a genuine warmth that made me feel seen. The first time I caught myself waiting for him to stop by, I felt a pang of guilt deep inside. It was the kind of guilt you push down quickly, covering it with a smile and a shrug, pretending it doesn't mean anything. After all, what harm was there in enjoying a bit of company when your husband was away? But harm doesn't always announce itself at the beginning. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, like water seeping through cracks, unnoticed until everything around it has begun to swell and break. One evening, David rushed through the door, suitcase in hand, already talking about a trip he had to take. He barely looked at me as he explained that a new project demanded his attention, that he might be gone longer than usual. I tried to swallow the familiar sting, nodding, pretending to understand. And then he said something that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. Mark will stop by while I'm gone, just to make sure you're not too lonely. The words were so casual, so thoughtless, yet they echoed in my head long after. He kissed my cheek and walked out the door, not too lonely. Did he know? Did he sense the growing emptiness between us? Or worse, did he sense the way I had begun to look at Mark? That night, the house felt heavier than usual. I stood by the window, watching David's car disappear down the street. And for a brief moment, I wanted to call him back, to beg him not to leave me again. But the words never left my lips. Instead, I sat down in the silence, my heart restless, my mind circling around a question I wasn't ready to face. What if the one person who filled the silence in my life wasn't my husband anymore? As the days stretched on, Mark's presence became more frequent. Sometimes it was small things, a light bulb change, a laugh shared over a clumsy accident in the kitchen. Other times it was quieter, deeper, the way he listened, The way his eyes softened when I spoke about things David hadn't asked about in months. I tried to tell myself it was innocent, that it was simply the comfort of friendship. But deep down, I knew there was more brewing beneath the surface. And when David finally packed his things for a longer trip, leaving me alone in the house with only Mark's promised company, I felt a spark I couldn't name. Fear, longing, anticipation, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't unravel. I told myself nothing would happen. I told myself I was strong enough to keep the line between loyalty and temptation unbroken. But as I closed the door behind David that day, the echo of his trust lingered in the air, and I wondered if I was already too far gone. The first evening without David passed quietly, too quietly. I tried distracting myself with a book, then with the television, but everything felt empty, like the silence was pressing in on me from all sides. And then came the knock at the door. Mark. He stood there with that familiar, easy smile, holding a bag of takeout in one hand. "Didn't think you'd want to cook tonight," he said. Just like that, the silence cracked, replaced by warmth that spread through the room. We ate together. At the kitchen table. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place, two people sharing food. But in the little spaces between conversation, I caught myself studying the way his eyes lingered on me, how his laugh seemed to reach me in places David's hadn't in a long time. It was dangerous, the way something so ordinary felt like a secret. That night was the beginning of a shift I couldn't ignore. The next day, he came by again. This time it was to fix a leaky faucet. I told him it wasn't necessary, but he brushed off my protest with a grin. "Keeps me busy," he said. And while he worked, I found myself watching him, noticing details I had never paid attention to before: the way his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the steadiness of his hands, the quiet confidence he carried. And everything he did, it unsettled me, this awareness. I wasn't supposed to notice, wasn't supposed to feel anything at all. But at every glance, every small act of kindness seemed to chip away at the careful walls I had built around myself. One evening, the sky broke open with rain. The storm rolled in fast and the house trembled with thunder. Mark was there again. He had come to check on me, worried the storm might knock out the power. His thoughtfulness should have comforted me, but instead, it left me uneasy. And then the lights flickered out. The house was swallowed in darkness, save for the dim glow of candles I scrambled to light. We sat together in the living room, the storm raging outside, the shadows of the flames painting flickering shapes on the walls. For a long time, neither of us spoke. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was softer than usual. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you're playing a part you never auditioned for?" The question hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, but I managed a small laugh, the kind you use to hide the truth. "Maybe," I admitted. Mark's eyes stayed on me, steady, searching. "I see you, you know. The way you try to hold everything together. But you deserve more than just waiting." My chest constricted. No one had ever said that to me before, not even David. And in that moment, with the rain hammering against the windows and the flicker of the candle between us, I felt something shift. Something irreversible. I tried to change the subject, to steer us back toward safer ground. But every word he spoke afterward carried a weight. Every pause felt loaded with meaning. And then his hand brushed against mine. It was an accident, or at least it should have been. But neither of us pulled away. His fingers lingered, light but deliberate, and my pulse raced in response. I told myself it was nothing. Just a fleeting touch. Just the storm, the darkness, the loneliness, making everything feel heavier than it was. But deep down, I knew better. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of moments I shouldn't have allowed. We laughed too easily, talked too late into the night. He asked questions David hadn't asked in years. What I dreamed of, what I feared, what I wanted out of life. And I answered honestly, forgetting myself in the comfort of being heard. Every time our eyes met, I felt the tension coil tighter, like a rope pulling us closer against our will. Every brush of his arm, every lingering glance left me restless. Long after he had gone, the guilt grew heavier with each passing day. I told myself I was strong enough to resist, that I would never let it go further, but temptation doesn't shout. It whispers. It weaves itself into your loneliness, disguises itself as comfort, and before you realize it, the line you swore you'd never cross is already behind you. One night, after another long dinner that stretched later than it should have, I walked him to the door. We stood there in the dim light, neither of us moving, neither of us speaking. The air was thick with everything unsaid. His hand lifted, almost hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. My breath caught, my heart thundering. In my chest. For a moment, I thought he would kiss me. For a moment, I wanted him to, but he didn't. He pulled back, his jaw tightening, his eyes dark with the same conflict that burned inside me. "Good night, Emily," he said softly, his voice rough, like it carried the weight of all the words. He couldn't say, and just like that, he was gone. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it as my chest heaved with unsteady breaths. My hands trembled, my lips tingled with the memory of what almost happened. It hadn't gone too far. Not yet, but I knew then, with chilling certainty, that it was only a matter of time. The morning after that almost kiss, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, a trick of loneliness and stormlit shadows. I tried to bury it under chores, under phone calls to friends, under anything that might distract me. But no matter what I did, the memory of Mark's hand brushing mine, of his fingers tucking that strand of hair behind my ear, refused to leave me. And when he returned the next evening, as though nothing had changed, I felt my resolve fracture. We settled into the same rhythm dinner, laughter, conversation that stretched into the night. But beneath it all, there was a hum, a charge in the air neither of us could ignore anymore. Every glance carried the weight of what we hadn't done. Every silence felt thick, expectant, like the world was waiting for us to take that final step. It happened in the simplest of ways. I reached for a plate at the same moment he did, our hands colliding, fingers tangling just a second too long. The air shifted, heavy, unspoken. He didn't move his hand. I didn't either. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I knew we were both done pretending. The kiss came fast, fierce, like a dam breaking. 1 second we were standing apart, the next we were pulled together, mouths crashing, hearts racing with something raw and undeniable. It was wrong. Every fiber of me screamed that truth, but it was also intoxicating, filling the empty spaces inside me that had been hollow for far too long. I should have stopped. I should have pulled away, but instead I let it happen. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of heat and breath and desperate need. Every whispered word, every lingering touch was laced with both hunger and guilt. It wasn't love not yet, maybe not ever, but it was release. It was validation. It was everything I had been craving in the silence of my marriage, and it terrified me how much I needed it. Afterward, the room felt impossibly still. Mark sat at the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, while I lay staring at the ceiling, my chest heaving with the weight of what we had done. "This changes everything," he said finally, his voice low, almost broken. I wanted to argue, to tell him it didn't have to, but the truth was heavy in my chest. It did change everything. I wasn't the same woman who had kissed her husband goodbye days earlier. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognize, someone who had crossed a line she could never uncross. When Mark left that night, he didn't look back. And I sat in the quiet, the guilt curling tight around me, suffocating. In its grip, David returned 2 days later. He walked through the door smiling, tired from work, but grateful to be home. He kissed my cheek, dropped his suitcase in the hallway, and began telling me about his trip as if nothing had shifted in the world we shared. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part of the wife he believed I still was, but inside, everything was. Different Dot when he touched me. I felt the ghost of Mark's hands. When he spoke, I heard the echo of words whispered in the dark by someone else. The gap between us had widened into a canyon, and no amount of pretending could close it. At night, I lay beside David, his steady breathing filling the silence, and I wondered if he could feel it, the distance, the betrayal lying between us like a shadow. I wondered if he sensed the way I flinched when he said Mark's name, the way my eyes darted away too quickly whenever he mentioned how grateful he was. For his friend's company, the guilt was unbearable, yet twisted with something even more dangerous, desire. Because no matter how heavy the shame, a part of me still longed for the way Mark had looked at me, the way he had touched me like I mattered. Like I was more than a fixture in the background of someone else's life. It was then I realized the cruelest truth of all. I couldn't go back. No matter how hard I tried to repair the image of the loyal wife, no matter how deeply I buried the memory of that night, something inside me had shifted forever. I had tasted something I couldn't untaste, crossed a threshold I couldn't retreat from, and though David would never know, though I would smile, cook his dinners, laugh at his stories inside, I carried a secret that would never stop burning, because when he left me with his friend, he thought he was leaving me in safe hands, but what he really left me with was temptation and the memory of what it felt like to finally give in. I wasn't sure if I regretted it more for happening or for the fact that part of me wanted it to happen again.